Well, I think we want to thank all of you for the example you set, for the model you give us of another way to break the cycle of violence, create safer communities, and victimization. We know that what we have tried, mass incarceration on a military model, for the last 30 years has been less than successful and is taking so much money that we cannot give our children what they need to keep them out of prison and on a healthy life course. Education, job preparation, job creation, all the things that a healthy society needs. So thank you for being here and showing us another way. I think one of the most telling statements that we have to keep going back to is 95% of the people are going to be back on the street in the community. Our current recidivism rate is around 64%. Every time somebody doesn't go back, another victim is not created, and we are safer. I do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask the OIG when they report on CROB to actually tell us if there is an inventory of programs like this, either self-help programs started by inmates or volunteer-generated programs. I have been to 5 or 6 different programs at San Quentin Prison. Some of them, like Kid Cats, which you may know about, which is a program that was developed by young men incarcerated for murder when they were juveniles, that it seems to be very much like yours, programs like No More Tears, and others. Do we have an inventory? Do we know where they are? And I think that as we look at uses of the recidivism fund that's been created in the state, we might want to look at ways of replicating some of these programs. One of the issues we face is that San Quentin Prison has literally probably hundreds of programs, well, at least scores of programs. It's in an area where there are many volunteers, many universities, many people, outside eyes that come in, creative minds that put things together. What about prisons that were probably cited for reasons of employment, that are far away from population centers, in remote places where they don't have those kinds of resources? Perhaps we could find a way of replicating programs using some of the recidivism money. And I would just, suggest to members of the committee that we can think about that. I do have a question about former prisoners serving as change agents. Could you say a little more about that? Last time I looked, it wasn't a credentialed occupation. Right. But I know that there have been efforts to have credentialed drug and alcohol abuse counseling programs where inmates can get jobs afterwards that are, so how does the job creation on the outside piece work?
I'm grateful you're asking about that because that is a little bit uphill. However, the addiction recovery movement has shown in many ways, and backed up by research, a very successful model of implementing the use of sponsors of former addicts as people that interact with current addicts. We feel that, there's really, other than presenting a good program, there's a need to reframe how prisons are done. Prisons can become resources to our community rather than places that dump parolees on our streets. And prisoners can be reframed as not just the problem, but a part of the solution. Many of these men find their dignity, find their excitement, their motivation in giving back to the places they once took from. And we're not saying, blanket. We're saying, selected, validated prisoners that are trained to go and teach their brothers and sisters what they've learned.
Well, I think that's a very interesting, it's an extremely interesting idea. I also think that the preparation for parole is very interesting, since we do ask that people show insight into their crime and remorse, but may offer no pathway to getting probably damaged human beings to that place.
Right.
It seems like a contradiction that we pay dearly for over time.
Yes.
I have just one other question. You said 3 tribes.
Yeah.
Are these divided along racial lines, along the type of crime committed,
Right.
geography? How do you do that?
Everybody can apply to become a student in the program. Our criteria, number 1, is to create as multiracial and as different gang affiliation variety as possible. It's part of the program for them in their re-socialization process to get along with everybody. And so you cannot find a more diverse group as one of these tribes.
Okay, so it's basically diverse, and
Absolutely.
you mix people up
Yes.
in some way. Do you notice, is there a difference in program efficacy between crimes of violence that have been impersonal, robbery, battery of somebody you don't know, gang activity, as opposed to family violence like what Jenny experienced, in terms of people's readiness to change?
There's differences and similarities. The program really takes as the vital stance that you've lost a short moment in which you committed your violence. And we take a year long to unpack how did you get to that moment and what happened in that moment, so that you never lose a moment like that again. So that's the similar place. What's different between, say, family violence and gang-related violence is lifestyle, and often greater breakdowns in situations with caregivers, in situations with safety for young children around alcohol and drug abuse. So the men do an inventory of what is called original pain and secondary pain. The original pain is the hand of cards that they were given. The secondary pain is what happened when they didn't deal with that kind of trauma and medicated and acted out. So both groups go through the same process. If it's not the family but more the gang-related stuff, it's a deeper journey because there's more to uncover.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from other members of the committee? Senator Leno?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me thank you very sincerely and personally for extending the invitation to our 3 presenters today. I had the great benefit of attending a recent graduation for the GRIP program a couple months ago at San Quentin. And though I've known Mr. Verdun for a while, it was the most intimate experience I've had with your success, your collective success. Jenny, I don't know your last name.
Lyon,
Lyon.
L-Y-O-N.
So I heard Ms. Lyon make her presentation, and it was as powerful then as it was today. And it's Pat? Yes. And I didn't get your last name.
Mims.
Mims. Thank you for your journey and your evolution to be with us today, and your support of the kinds of decisions I hope we're going to make, which is to put our money where our mouths are and to make this happen. And I would agree with Mr. Verdun then, this is a moment, an opportunity that we have, and that I would hate for us to lose it, because we have reached a breaking point, and we all realize that. So much of the success, the opportunity that was afforded us, and now the potential success for realignment came very much out of a fiscal crisis. Many of us had been looking for ways to do things differently, but it wasn't until we hit that fiscal wall that we knew we had to change course. And Mr. Reardon, I often thought, but I never asked, how it was that you came to give so much of your adult life to the inside of prisons. And so it's the first time I've heard your personal story today, and it makes so much sense. And it's something that personal that can drive us in ways that otherwise just doesn't happen. So thank you for offering me that additional piece to the puzzle. I provided, and I say this with all due respect to the person to whom I'm going to refer with full confidence. I wrote a letter on my State Senate stationery to each of approximately 80 graduates when I attended the ceremony a couple months ago. And I stand by the statement of my letter, which was very clearly congratulations for completing the program, for making the personal decision to pursue peace, and to being a change agent. And these are, all the graduates were lifers. And some will make their way back to reentry, some will not. Some will potentially die in prison. But I got a call from a district attorney's office in a county not far from here. And this district attorney, assistant district attorney, had prosecuted the case of one of the graduates. And it was a grisly, horrific crime, as I'm sure most of the crimes are of those who participate in your program. And she was very offended by my letter. And the reason I bring that up today is because hearing from the three of you gave me some insight as to why she responded. And though she was very respectful to me on the phone, my staff got a real earful from her, as in, how dare you be doing this? And this person's taking your letter with your, and she said it wasn't even so much the content of the letter, but because it says state senator on the top of the letterhead, this is going to be used for an argument for parole. And this is not an individual who deserves any parole. Well, she's certainly welcome to her opinion. My letter did not speak to parole at all. That's for the Board of Parole hearings. I would never be so presumptuous as suggest anything I had to say in a case of which I don't know the details be used in the consideration for something as serious as paroling someone who's got a life sentence. But again, I share all this because it seems to me her response was based out of a cynicism that there are certain people who commit certain crimes who cannot be redeemed. They don't deserve any second chances, and it's just a way of looking at the world. And so she's very cynical that people who commit a certain kind of crime, because of the horrible nature of it, could ever accomplish what Mr. Mims has accomplished, or for that matter, accomplish what Ms. Lyon has accomplished. Because the two of you are inextricable, and of course you are living proof of being both at the same time. So I'm eager to join you, Senator Hancock, in your efforts as we approach the months of our finalizing our budget to, in a way we probably have not in many years, significantly invested in being change agents ourselves to do something different and to create some real good in the meantime. But a part of our challenge is going to be dealing with the cynicism of some folks in law enforcement who see the grisly nature of these crimes much more closer than we ever will. So there's reason for cynicism, I get that. But we need to include them in the process, too, of the healing that your program so beautifully manifests. So just a brief question or two. I think it's wise that we do look at the inventory of programs, because I don't have that perspective. I have a very narrow perspective. This is one of probably many. But I'm curious, you had mentioned, Mr. Verdun, that there's a waiting list of 300 I don't know that you would have this information, but do you have an idea of all the many other wonderful, extraordinary, successful programs specifically at San Quentin? Are there others with waiting lists that long, or is that sort of average?
Perhaps not that long, but sufficiently long.
There's great need.
Yeah, there's great need, and I really put Inside Out organization together to spread some of the wealth, because it's just too painful at this point, having the plethora of programs in San Quentin and nothing but dominoes and pinochle in the other prisons. And so that's our goal, and I could certainly make recommendations of other valid programs of the colleagues I appreciate, and I could, be of advice in the variety of rehabilitation efforts, because there's academic, there's recreation, there's vocational, and then there's behavioral, and so if I can be of any use to the committee or any other body that meets and decides over these cases, situations, I would be glad to do so.
You say you have 111 graduates?
Yeah.
And did you say it was 30-something have been paroled?
No, 17
17
have been given a release date.
have been given. They're not necessarily out, but they've been given a
Let's
date.
see, 12 of them are out, and
5 more have dates.
yeah, and I also want to say a number of them, you perhaps think Mr. Mims is the exception in, but a number of them are working with challenged youth, running addiction recovery centers, running halfway homes, going to universities themselves, but are giving back to the places they took from, because that restores some of the dignity. And so, again, in terms of reframing problems as solutions, we all lose. It isn't just that these people are safely behind walls and thrown away. We all, as a society, as long as one is incarcerated, as long as one is victimized, are incarcerated and victimized to that degree. So we've put some innovative ideas together that we hope can flourish.
Okay.
I have myself used that 95% figure when I'm talking to constituents, that the question isn't whether we want these folks to come out. They are coming out.
Right.
The question is, how do we want them to come out?
Right.
And I was taken with your comment, Ms. Lyon, because I've been giving it some thought lately. We use the word recidivism quite often, and we talk about the 64, 65% recidivism rate. But when you said it's really a fancy word for re-victimization, that we get to the core of what we're talking about if we use re-victimization as opposed to the word recidivism. Recidivism is somewhat clinical. Recidivate has a nice ring to it, but it doesn't get to the fact of the matter, which is a very emotional matter, and that's re-victimization. So we have a re-victimization rate of 65% in this state, and we might talk about it more in those terms. So just my last question then would be about the logistics of how we scale something such as GRIP. One of the first challenges that comes to my mind is that you have the benefit of being on San Francisco Bay, within easy commute distance from San Francisco and other major population areas of the Bay, and you have extraordinary human beings like Ms. Lyon who can volunteer her time. How do we replicate in further flung parts of the state where we may not have the universe of wealth of experience to be able to come, whether they're volunteered or paid? How do we deal with that?
No, I have given that some serious thought, because, Inside Out, wanting to replicate, you very quickly come to that reality that there's no infrastructure. There's also no culture in the department that makes this happen, which is something I could speak to at length, but won't here.
We talked a bit about that.
Right. No, it's very important. See, the pendulum has swung now, we hope, back to funding rehabilitation. if there's not a culture change in the department that receives that as a valid addition, then the pendulum is going to swing back because research will say, well, the programs didn't work. So it is an important piece to speak about, but no doubt for another moment. We're in a year of capacity building because there is a lot of demand for the program. We've had a lot of exposure on shows like NewsHour and even abroad, where the Bosnian government, before the state of California did, is implementing the program in Bosnian prisons. So we are building capacity to get ready for replication. As one element of that, we're filming our Wednesday class to create a DVD instructional series.
You should share with everyone, because I don't know that it's been described, the nature of the program. It's once a week for 52 weeks.
Yes, once a week for 52 weeks. And it's set up with a very strong peer element. We call it normative culture, where they help set the norms and the values, and we sit back and watch them enforce their own values, which is a 180 on how prison works. Right. So our delivery model has that DVD instructional series, it has a workbook, and it has an element of training the inmates themselves, including the ones in prison and the ones that we would request permission for to enter prisons, to set up a situation where the program could flourish and could take off. We're very happy to film the program because it would also function as a very good train-the-trainer piece. So we are thinking about that because it's very much the reality of the state of California, and that we have 33 prisons, and many of them are in the boonies. So,
if I could just say, I think it's hard to do this now, and we do have a fairly full agenda. I was going to suggest that if you, for example, could put something in writing about not scaling up to 33 prisons, but maybe another prison, or maybe, is it possible to do this in a remote prison? Look at Blythe, look at Pelican Bay, look, and tell me or tell us a suggestion, because we would want to work with you, and I think there are some folks inside programming now at CDCR that would want to work with you to figure out how you would get it to work in a situation where you don't have a volunteer or professional community that we do in some of the more urban parts of the state. I think it would require some kind of a grant program where, because if the warden doesn't want to apply for the money, as you said, you're not getting a culture in which any kind of change can thrive. And I think I'm hearing more and more from everywhere that people realize now that a cultural shift is going to be needed out of a very militarized and blaming model into something that allows something different. So this is taking one step forward at a time, but if you could commit anything to writing and run it by us, this is an ongoing dialogue and very important right now when we're crafting the state budget.
Madam Chair, just one last thank you. I hope Ms. Lyon and Mr. Mims, I'll take it that Mr. Verdun already knows how powerful your presence and presentation is. So when you do this, know that you captivate your audience. It's really something else. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very quickly, Madam Chair, can you give me a general idea of the budget of operating the program currently?
In San Quentin State Prison? It's about $400,000.
A year?
Yeah.
And that's currently funded how?
Do you believe in miracles?
Yeah, I do. Okay. I ran nonprofits. I do.
I've learned, yes. No, it's,
So
when
private?
As when people come in and see what we do, they're behind it.
Got it.
unfailingly.
So no public dollars currently?
No public dollars
Okay.
currently.
Okay.
So it's individuals and foundations.
Got it. And I just would concur with everything Senator Leno said. You know, the one issue I think, as you characterized cynicism, was the root cause of the blowback you got from your letter. I think the sometimes unspoken elephant in the room is also bias. Bias across race, bias across class, bias across, based on gender. And so I think that that's something that we can never ignore, given the demographic of who's incarcerated in CDC currently. And the other piece around re-victimization, that's great that we call it what it really is, but my concern around the concept of re-victimization is outside of this conversation, or outside someone watching the video as I did at your invitation, or knowing about your program, we could see the victimization as one way, not that hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. And so if we're going to refer to it as re-victimization, we have to recognize that it's also the re-victimization from the former inmate's perspective, right, that they too are a victim. No. And it's not just going one way, but it's a two-way street, if you will, in keeping with your concept about hurt people hurt people. Yeah. So I think it's incumbent upon us that we always accurately depict who the inmates are as victims themselves as well. Yeah,
because each individual crime is also a window in what is the greater social breakdown that this crime came from. And by just throwing people away, we are missing out. Right. As a culture, right, what we could learn. Right. And that's all I'm saying. And this is as middle of the road as it can get. Right. It's public safety.
And just the last, very quickly, piece for me. Thank you, Mr. Sims, for having the courage to share your story. I appreciate that. What I also heard you say were all of the vocational training programs that you went through. Yes. And I think the mistake that we have made is we put all of our energies into that basket. But that really has to be, it's a three-legged stool. It's, community support, reentry. It's making sure that you've got the vocational training. So when you come out, it's not only that you've healed yourself, but you can get a job someplace. Absolutely. Because part of the victimization is survival, trying to eat or feed your family. And so, I think from our perspective, the pendulum tends to swing extreme one way or the other, that, CDC adds the R back up to their name or they take it out. But it's really a three-legged stool that we've got to provide all of those supports for you to successfully reenter a welcoming community, job skills, as well as self-healing. So I think that's a part of kind of the whole equation that we must never forget. So thank you again for sharing.
Senator Anderson.
I want to thank you all for your testimony. I appreciated a lot, Mr. Sims, your comments. And, this is always a balancing act. I mean, you want to give people a path of redemption. You want to give them a path to re-enter society and be a productive member. But you also have to protect the people who never went to jail, who never committed murder. And that's a balancing act. And I think the biggest challenge for me is discerning who's earnest in their attempt from people who are gaming the system. And today, Mr. Sims, your testimony was very helpful in formulating the type of transition a person has to go through in order to be a productive citizen. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.